Welcome to our Thursday's broadcast of the Gospel Truth. Today I'm continuing to teach about Joseph, learning lessons from Joseph. That's the title of this teaching that I have, Lessons from Joseph. And I tell you, this has saved my bacon more than once. This has been a tremendous influence in my life. And I know that there's a lot of people that desire the right things from God. You may even know what God's will for your life is, but as you go towards that, you're going to experience adversity. You're going to experience things that don't look like what God has spoken to you is coming to pass. And most people wash out because they don't stay focused on the Word. They don't take lessons from people like Joseph. They get their circumstances. It's like when Peter was walking on the water. As long as you're looking at Jesus, you can walk on top of the water. But when you take your eyes off of Jesus and look at the wind and the waves, you begin to sink. And most people just sink. Most people wash out because they can't last through that adversity until the time that they begin to start seeing their vision come to pass. I have certainly dealt with a lot of things that look contrary to what God has put in my heart, and I'm telling you, one of the ways that I have dealt with it and that I've been able to keep focused and going towards the direction that God has for my life is because I go to the Word and I look at people like Joseph. There's others, but Joseph has been one of the great examples that God has used in my life to keep me motivated, to keep hope in me when it looked like everything was contrary. And the same thing will work for you. I'm sharing these things on television because I know that many of you have a desire to see God's will come to pass. You have a vision, but you're just in that hard place where at the moment it doesn't look like what God has spoken in your heart's coming to pass, and you're tempted to quit, to give up, to be discouraged. Joseph is an antidote for all of that. The Word of God is an antidote for it. I'm telling you, if you would just go to the Word, if you would study the Word, if you would let God speak to you through these characters and learn things at their expense, you wouldn't have to make all the mistakes yourself. You wouldn't have to learn by just the school of hard knocks. Boy, that's important what I just said. So, I've been sharing about Joseph, and this is into our third week. We're nearing the end of our third week, and I've covered a lot of material. But the point that I was making on my program yesterday is that Joseph was 17 years old when God first gave him the dreams about what his life was supposed to be like, and He gave him a sense of purpose and destiny. And then he was 30 years old when he actually stood before Pharaoh. So that was 13 years that after God planted this dream in his heart, for 13 years, every step he took looked like it was in the wrong direction. He was going down instead of up. Everything in his life went wrong. His brothers sold him into slavery. He went into prison. And regardless of how faithful he was, it just seemed like things were getting worse and worse. But he was able to persevere because he had this vision in his heart. He had a sense of destiny, a purpose. I'm telling you, you can't emphasize too much how important it is for you to know what God's will for your life is and be moving in that direction. If you don't have a destination, if you don't have a point that you're headed towards in sight, well then you know what? You are not going to be able to persevere when things get hard. I'm telling you, I've seen this in so many people. They have a desire to do something, but they just aren't motivated. They don't have a sense of destiny. You know, I remember that when President Ronald Reagan was shot by, I believe it was John Hinckley, that I read Reagan's biography after he was out of the presidency. And that was a deal changer for him because he was supposed to have died. According to the doctors, there is no medical reason that he should have lived. It was absolutely miraculous. And when he pulled through that, he in his own biography wrote that he, from that time on, lived with a sense of destiny. He knew God had put him in that place for a purpose, and he was no longer afraid of man. He wasn't worried about their acceptance or rejection. He lived with a sense of destiny, a mandate from God that he was there for a purpose, and he lived his life with that purpose. And by his own admission, it just changed everything. You know, my whole life, I remember as a little kid, I mean, when I was 5, 6 years old, I remember laying down in the backyard at our home in Arlington, Texas, and I'd look up at the stars and I'd just wonder about God. You know, I was trying to figure out the enormity of all of this and figure out what my spot was. Where do I fit in? What is your purpose for my life? I remember my parents actually thinking something was wrong with me because I'd just lay out in the backyard for hours and look up at the sky and pray and talk to God. God, what's your purpose for my life? And even though I didn't have any clear direction at that time, I always believed that there was a purpose for my life. I always knew I had a destiny. But then as I got older, I got caught up in school and in friends. And, you know, the first 18 years of my life were pretty much planned out. And so I didn't have to give a lot of thought to it. And so I kind of lost some of that. But I always had this awareness that there was a purpose for my life. As I got ready to graduate from high school and had to start making decisions about whether I was going to college and what I was doing, then is when I got serious about saying, God, I don't want to just go to school and do something because everybody else is doing it. What is your will for my life? And you know, I recently taught this on television, if you saw that series on how to find, follow, and fulfill God's will. And when God finally revealed His purpose for my life to me on March the 23rd, 1968, is when my whole life took on purpose. And from that time on, I haven't known the detail. It's like seeing something so far off, you can't see the detail, but you've got the destination in sight. And as I get closer and closer, I see more detail. It gets clearer and clearer. But man, since 1968, I have lived my life consumed with the purpose, with the destiny for my life. I can't even relate to people that are just going through life and you're just kind of like a pinball just bouncing around, gravity's pulling you down, and just whatever gets in your way, you bounce off it. And if this doesn't work, well, I'll go over here. If this person and my marriage doesn't work out, I'll leave them, I'll go get me another one. And you aren't focused. You don't have a purpose. I'm telling you, that is a recipe for disaster. I can't even relate to people who live that way. You need to find out what God's will is for your life, and then you need to get tenacious, and you need to pursue it. And there's going to be resistance, and you might find yourself during that period of time where there is resistance. But take a lesson from Joseph, that man, he just kept doing everything with a sense of purpose and destiny. God had given him these dreams, and regardless of what happened to him, he kept just believing that someday I'm coming through this. Someday I'm going to succeed. And as I shared on our program yesterday, I believe the greatest indicator of Joseph's character wasn't when he was suffering and going through adversity, because even an average Christian will turn to the Lord in crisis. When is it that you pray the most? If you're typical, I can guarantee you the average Christian spends more time praying when they're under the gun, when things are going bad, they need help, and they turn to God. But the average Christian, when things are going well, they don't seek the Lord the same way. They depend upon themselves. They become self-dependent instead of God-dependent. Did you know that this is what's behind so much of the carnality, the coolness in Christians' lives in America? Because we turn to God, and God has blessed this nation and given us prosperity, and people succeed and prosper in America. But sad to say, when things are going good, most people don't turn to the Lord. They have to wait until there's a crisis. When 9/11 hit, this entire nation just turned to God, and all of a sudden the churches were full for a few months. And then as the pressures ease off, people go back to just depending upon themselves. But every time there's a crisis, in World War II, different things, you see the entire nation just turning to God. And it's a shame that you have to have a crisis to do it. But most people will serve God in a crisis situation. I'm saying most people who have any commitment to the Lord at all, because they know that, God, you've got to bring me through. I can't do this on my own. But the greatest temptation is when there's success, when there's prosperity. When you no longer are under a crisis situation, how much do you seek God then? Sad to say, most people don't seek God as much, and because of it, their prosperity and success that they long for and pray for so much is actually the undoing of most people. Man, that's a huge statement right there. And you know, because I really believe this, and I've seen this not only in the life of Joseph, David, Moses, different people, but I see it in our world today. Because of it, I'm actually seeking God more in success when things are going good, because I realize that that's actually the greatest temptation. When we are in a situation that is beyond our ability, it nearly forces us to depend upon God. But when you get into a situation where everything looks like it's good, you can coast. You no longer have to seek God. You don't have to pray. You don't have to go to church. You don't have to do these things. Sadly, most Christians will let off on the gas. They don't pursue God with the same passion when things are good. And because of that, it just guarantees that you will have a crisis later on. I'm telling you, this is something you need to write down. This is just a axiom, a truth, a fact in the Christian life that you need to never forget, that you are your most vulnerable in success and prosperity, not in hardship. And because of that, you need to guard your heart. And when you see the blessing of the Lord come upon you, man, you need to just make yourself even more dependent upon God. See, Joseph, this is exactly what he did. 17 years old when God gave him the visions, 30 when he became ruler over Egypt, but it was another 9 years. It was a total of 22 years after God put this vision in his heart before Joseph saw his brethren come to him and bow down. And the vision that God had given him, it was 22 years before he saw it come to pass. And during 9 of those years, he had enough power and authority that he could have forced his brothers to bow down to him. He could have made his dreams come to pass, but he didn't do it. He stayed dependent upon God. To me, that is the greatest indicator of the true nature and character of Joseph. Joseph was a humble man. Joseph was a man who was God dependent. He was dependent upon God. He wasn't going to force things to come to pass. You know, I've had to deal with these same things in my own life. The Lord showed me I was going to reach multitudes of people, and just for years I saw no success. And then eventually I went on radio, and we began to start seeing people respond, and our radio ministry grew. But it was still, the vision on the inside of me was still much bigger. And I remember one time in the mid-1980s that I had an opportunity, I forgot all of the details right now, but I had an opportunity to just literally go on hundreds of radio stations at one time. And I was going to roll the dice and make the commitment and do it, and it would have taken a miracle from God to pay those bills and stuff. But I was just ready to do it because I was frustrated. I wanted to somehow or another make it come to pass. And anyway, as I prayed and sought the Lord, God just showed me that that was the flesh. It wasn't time yet, and I just needed to cool my jets. But I've been tempted with these things. I know that, man, I had a desire. I wanted to see God's vision for my life and ministry come to pass right now. I didn't want to wait. I know that there's some of you right now that you have a vision and you aren't really liking what I'm saying because you are to this place of frustration where I'm tired of waiting. I want something right now. But I'm telling you, there is no way to microwave your ministry. There is no shortcut to what God wants you to do. You just have to keep serving God, and as God opens up a door of opportunity, of course, take it. But I'm saying, don't you kick the door open. Don't you make things happen. And one of the things that I experienced, I had people that, came along after me. I was in the ministry before them. They came along after me, and I mean, boy, they just blew past me like I was going in reverse. And it says in the scripture that it's unwise to compare yourself among yourself and measure yourself by yourself. But I've been guilty of doing that. I've seen people that started later than me and succeed and get bigger and pass me up and reach more people and stuff. And it made me want to just try and somehow or another make things happen. I had a group of guys come to me one time. They were from California, Tulsa, Dallas. I'm not sure. It seemed like there was someplace else, but these were big people that had raised over $2 million in one letter, $2 million profit for a television ministry. And I'm not going to mention who it is, but later this person wound up crashing and burning, and today they're just a fraction of what they used to be. But they use these Madison Avenue techniques, they use these fundraisers, these letter writers to come in, and they had raised this other minister $2 million through one letter. So they came to me and they said, we can guarantee, it wasn't $2 million, it was $20 million that they had raised for this other minister. And they came to me and said my ministry was a lot smaller, but they could guarantee me $1 million profit if I would let them write a letter and send it out. And at that time, our ministry didn't even have $1 million in an entire year. We were probably around $80,000 or $90,000 a year. I don't know, but it was small. And I mean, I would have loved to have had $1 million extra dollars. I could have gone on new radio and television, done things. And so I allowed them to come and talk to me because I was impatient. I wanted to see this vision God had put in my heart come to pass. And as they got to sharing with me, they gave me a sample of what they had done for this other minister, and then they told me what they would do. And you know, they had it down to a science. How many times you underline things, whether you put brackets out in the margin. They had it down to what colors of paper and ink caused people to give. I never thought of those kind of things, and yet they claimed that you could guarantee that people would give if you do this. But the main thing was they had pictures that they were going to put in there of African babies that their belly were swollen from malnutrition and flies crawling on their face, and me talking about these orphanages and stuff. And I had to stop him in the middle of this thing, and I said, but I don't have any orphanages. They said, well, this other guy that we raised $20 million for, he didn't have them either, but says people will give and then you can use the money for whatever you want to. And I said, but that's dishonest. And they said, but it works. It doesn't matter how you get the money. It's just a matter of if you get the money, and then you can use as much integrity as you want to spend it, but you just need to get this money. And you know, I remember standing up in those guys and saying, hey guys, my integrity isn't worth $1 million. I mean, $1 million isn't enough to pay me to get rid of my integrity. I said, I'm not going to do it. This is a lie. And I kicked them all out. And I refused all of these things. But you know, I've been right there to where you have a desire and man, you got this goal and it takes money to get there. And so if I just compromised a little bit, if I just let them, you know, shade the truth a little bit, maybe I could have a shortcut to be able to accomplish my goals. And I'm telling you, compromise is a language of the devil. You just do not do that. Whatever you compromise to get, you're going to lose. Whatever you compromise to keep, you're going to lose. Just compromise is a language of the devil. And I, by the grace of God, I was tempted, but I refused it, and I just waited. And you know, right now, our ministry is just in a position where we are blessed, blessed, blessed. I'm not going to take the time to explain all of that to you, but I'm telling you, things that I used to dream about are just coming easily. We are seeing people's lives changed. Things are happening that, you know what, I was tempted to take shortcuts to try and get there, to bend the truth, to do things, to manipulate, to compromise, and by the grace of God, I chose not to do it. And now we are seeing the fruit of that faithfulness and just standing and doing what God told me to do. I'm seeing the fruit of it on every wave. Every day we just have the blessing of God come upon us. And I'm telling you, if I would have compromised, I don't think I'd be where I am today. I don't think that I would see the people's lives changed. I believe that it would have short-circuited what God's will for my life was. I believe it would have hindered His will from coming to pass. And I know that I'm speaking to people right now that you are in that situation where you have a vision, a dream, you're frustrated, you're tempted to take another route, you're tempted to compromise and to do all of these things. I'm telling you, don't do it. You stick with God. Go to Joseph and see that Joseph just remained faithful even after he was given enough power and authority, that he could have forced things to come to pass on his own, he remained God dependent. You know, it's my personal opinion that one reason we go through this time in between when God plants the vision in us and when we actually start seeing it fulfilled, the reason we go through these hardships, one of the things is to keep us, to teach us to depend upon God, to trust in God. If you watch my recent series that I did on how to find, follow, and fulfill God's will, this is exactly what happened with Moses. Moses was in this position of power. Most people start at nothing and work up to it. Moses started as Pharaoh's son, and he had all of this power and might, and because of it, it gave him a self-confidence, and he was going to try and accomplish God's will through his own strength and power instead of relying upon God. And because of that, he went out and actually killed an Egyptian, thinking that his brethren would have understood how that God would use his might and his position to deliver the Israelites, and yet they didn't understand. And because of it, he had to run into the wilderness and spend 40 years in the wilderness learning that, God, I'm sorry that I took a word from you and made a paragraph out of it, that I tried to force your will to come to pass through my own strength and through my own power. It's important for you to realize he wasn't just imposing his self-will. He was trying to make God's will come to pass, but he was going to do it with his plan. He thought he knew more than God, and because of it, it cost the children of Israel 30 years extra bondage, and it cost him 40 years in the wilderness. And you can see this play out through the rest of his life when he got self-willed, and instead of speaking to the rock the way God told him to, he decided he'd strike it twice. That was more dramatic. He was going to do it his way. It cost him going into the promised land. He never did go in and see the fulfillment of everything his life had been about, because God saw this self-will, this self-confidence rising up, and God nipped it in the bud, or it would have cost the children of Israel another 40 years in the wilderness. I'm telling you, one of the reasons that we go through the hardships, I'm not saying that God causes them, but one of the things that happens during this time when we've got a vision in our heart and yet we can't see it fulfilled, it looks like it may never be fulfilled, it teaches us to just depend upon God. And Joseph learned that lesson so well that after he became the absolute ruler and could have used his power and position to make his dreams come to pass, he didn't do a thing. He waited on God. I tell you, that is gold. That is priceless. When you find a person who, even when they can do things in their flesh, they aren't going to do it by their own power and ability. They aren't going to move or do anything until God tells them to act. Man, that's powerful. Those are some of the lessons I learned through Joseph.